Father's Table, an introspective look and conversation about our fathers and how they shaped our lives.
Welcome back to the Father's Table. It's good to have you back with us. Tonight I have a very special guest. This is like a two-parter because the last time I had Crystalline on the show joining us. But tonight I have Bart joining us, who is Crystalline's husband. Bart is a 30-year-old Lutheran pastor from Buffalo, New York. He resides with his family in Los Angeles. And it seems like, from what I see here, Bart comes from a line of pastors, which is really cool. He's been married since 2015, and he has two daughters. Welcome to the show, Bart.
Hi, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
No
It's good to be
problem,
here.
man. It's good to have you. It's good to
Thank you.
have you. Thanks for coming, and uh, thanks for supporting. It's really cool. Just I don't know if you heard the last episode, but I met Bart through Crystalline. I met Crystalline at the library for like toddler time,
Yeah,
and uh, the kids were playing and conversations started happening, and me and Crystalline was talking, and she told me about her father. I said, "Hey, I do a podcast," and then the rest was history. And then, we were both, talked about how we're Christians and faith and a whole bunch of different things. And we're here tonight, and I think it's going to be a good show. So for you, Bart, I want to do something a little different.
okay.
I tried this before, and I don't know if it went well, but I'm going to try it again tonight. Uh, so what I'm gonna
Doesn't
do is
hurt.
I'm gonna fire questions off at you as quickly as I can, and I just want quick. You don't have to explain it yet, but I just want quick yes or no answers.
Okay. Oh dear.
Um, so it's gonna be
Yes or no?
quick. Yes or no. I'm gonna ask you
No
quick yes or no
pontificating.
question. Yep. Just get basic things. I'm gonna try to do this in 15 seconds.
Okay.
So, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. Here we go. Do you keep in touch with your father?
I do. Yes.
Is your biological father married to your biological mother?
Yes.
Do you have sisters, brothers by the same father?
Yes. One sister, one brother.
Is your father or was your father a reserved man?
I would say no.
Do you consider your father heroic?
I do.
Do you consider your father a passive? Passive.
Yes and no.
Growing up, was your father active in your life?
Yes.
Were you afraid of your father?
No.
Did your father show you how to live life?
Yes.
Do you want your children to be like you?
Yes.
Do you want your children to be better?
I do.
Did your father teach you how to be a man?
Yes.
Do you believe your upbringing shaped the man you are today?
Yes.
Was your father there for you growing up?
Yes.
Do you resent your father?
No.
Do you honor your father?
I hope so.
Did you honor your father growing up?
I hope so. I would say that's probably a yes and no.
Okay. And one more. Did your father smoke?
Uh, Not in my lifetime, but prior, yes.
Okay. Cool. I don't even know if that was 15 seconds.
Probably like 30 because I didn't just say
Yeah.
yes and no all the
You know
time.
what's
I'm
funny?
sorry.
No, it's all good. You know what's funny? When I try to do this, I turned it I turned the alarm off, so I couldn't hear it go off. But these are good answers. I'm starting to get into the rhythm of doing this exercise with guests. I didn't do it with Crystalline because I didn't have it down yet.
Mhm.
But I did it with another guy, and he explained the answers, and that's cool. So that's why I tried to make sure to tell you that, hey, just try to answer yes or no, because I
Yeah.
wanted to hit to these points. So let's begin. I'd like to start off the same way with people. I would like you to close your eyes,
Okay.
take 3 deep breaths, and tell me the first thing that comes to mind when you think of your father.
My father was very hardworking, uh, both in his vocation of being a pastor himself, but also as a father and a husband. He demonstrated his love through service and doing things and being present, that he was very involved in those very tangible ways.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know how much you want me to share right now, but if you would like me to continue to expound on that, I'm happy to.
Oh, please go ahead, man. It's an interview. Relax, man. We just talking.
Um, but he, for example, this is something that I always remember, is he would go to sleep at 9 p.m., if not earlier, way earlier. He would wake up at 4:30 in the morning or so, and be out of the house at the church office and get a lot of the administrative work done, so that he was able to come home. Say it was when we were in school, to either take us to school, get everything ready for school, take us wherever we needed to go, or if it was summer, we would uh, be able to spend time with us at breakfast.
Mhm.
And he would feel comfortable doing that because he just spent 3 hours prior doing all of this work, so that he could do such things. So my father was very, very intentional about making the time to
Mhm.
be there for us as children. And that was also partly to do with my mom has lupus.
Mhm.
So he, um, by necessity, had a lot to do in being a supporter and caretaker toward my mom, in a lot of different ways, as a father and a husband. But that's just in his nature, and I think it just matched everything perfectly in that sense. So
Oh, okay. So your mom had lupus growing up, and your dad took care of her and was a pastor at the same time.
yes, yeah, and my mom, as I was younger, was more capable of doing certain activities and things, so she was not completely dependent. Though certainly it impacted her at having lupus and made her more dependent than others. And that has only progressed in terms, or regressed, if you sense, as we've gotten older. The more my dad's caretaking toward my mom has had to pick up, as
Mm,
her health has declined in aging more rapidly than any other a quote unquote normal person in normal health.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, your father let's just camp out at around being a pastor.
Mm,
Take me back to you growing up, like
yeah.
elementary school. Was he a pastor then?
Yes, he was a pastor all of my life. He was a pastor at the same church since his first call out of seminary. So
Mhm.
he met my mother at the church that he took his first call to be a pastor, and
Oh,
so that's where then thus they got, became husband and wife, and then where we were born there in Western New York.
gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha. So you grew up like in the church, so to
Yeah,
speak, and just seeing how it.
yeah.
So, would you say he? Well, I think you've said this, but he was around growing up. Regular. Life. Go to school, elementary school,
Mm,
come home. He's there. Hey, Dad, how you doing? Da da
yeah,
da da. And that's how it was. But I also assume that you spent a lot of time at church.
I did. Yeah. And in a lot of different ways. Whether it was he would bring us with him while he had some work that he had to do, whether he brought us with him to help with some of the work that we had to do, or we were, active in the choir or any of the Bible studies or the youth groups or anything of the sort. It was kind of very much involved. It was a second home. Running around that place is ingrained in my
Gotcha.
memory. That
Gotcha. Gotcha.
the blue carpet in the sanctuary is if I close my eyes, I see it as clear as day. All the different characteristics of that church.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you listening, um, there's a term that describes Bart. Um, he would be called a PK. Have you heard about these guys? Bart. Yeah.
Oh, I'm a
Now,
PK.
okay. So I just want to ask you: Are the legends true? Are PK kids really like out of line, or is that just like a urban legend or something?
I think that it is there is a truth to it, but it is not the rule necessarily. And
Gotcha.
I know other PKs and I know other pastors and their families in which their kids turned out to be the stereotypical troubled PKs. So that's not an urban legend for them. Yeah, for me,
Gotcha.
that was not my experience. So either I'm an anomaly, or or it's just split half and half, or anything like that.
Now, you being a PK, why do you think that some children just go off the rails? Like, if you grew up in a household and your father's a pastor
Hmm.
and he's preaching in front of people, people are coming to him, he's praying for people, doing all sorts of stuff, doing good, loving people as God would love him. It's a scripture in the Bible.
Yeah.
How is it that the kids growing up seeing their dad inside the church and outside the church just completely go off the mark and just do whatever they want to do, or just do something just crazy?
So to clarify,
Yeah.
why do the kids kind of go off the rails?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot of factors that play in my observance and in my conversations uh, and just looking and reading, doing some research on that. I mean, there's studies on pastors' families and life as a family of the pastor and so forth. I think there's a lot of factors. One, for example, is uh, the public image of the pastor is different than the private experience of
Mhm.
a father. So a kid growing up sees that dissonance if the character if is not matched.
Gotcha.
And I think that is a factor. That's not, again, not everybody's situation. The other is in some ways the whole family is a public image, and people have access to your lives because they have access to the pastor, the father, um, his life or her life, depending on who's
Right.
listening. Um, and I think that pressure can either be self-imposed on children, like it's too much for them to kind of feel like everybody's watching them all the time and making
Hmm.
sure that they're living a certain way, or it's too much for the pastor, or the husband, or the father, because he's trying to keep his family in line to protect or preserve an image. And so if a child grows up kind of in this like very legalistic or kind of tense, rigid way or manner, they're going to rebel against that in time.
Hmm.
And I think that is another factor in what takes place. So um, again,
Gotcha.
that might not have been imposed by the father himself. It might have just been just the nature of the job, and then the demeanor and disposition of the children, and handling that, and handling all eyes on them, uh,
Hmm.
feeling themselves that they had to be a certain way or look a certain way. uh, so I think those are just some big factors there, um, you know, that I think played into that kind of stereotype.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, was your father, would you say your father's character was consistent inside the church and outside the church? Like, did you see the same man preach, excuse me, preaching, inside the church, and then the same man was inside the home?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say so. And I mean, to a fault, meaning
Mhm.
one of the things we sadly teased my father about growing up, was how my dad kind of fumbled over his words a lot, and he kind of wasn't so concerned about how he looked, and how he dressed, like, and how his dress started kind of falling apart, you know. So we would always kind of tease him for him getting tongue tied a lot, and just kind of just being himself, just like how he was at home was there. It was him as a pastor, and it was almost to the other degree where it's like you might want to hide that a little bit,
Mm.
you know, pants falling down in the sanctuary, things like that. But the thing is, everybody loved that about my dad.
Mhm.
He was so real.
Mhm.
Um, he was so real, and people got that. And where I grew up, it was very, oh, forgive me, is it blue collar or white collar? The hardworking class.
I think it's blue collar.
I
I
get
think.
confused on that sometimes.
Yeah.
People worked really hard. They were more like common people. And
Hmm.
my dad was relatable, and him making some mistakes that were inconsequential, and kind
Hmm.
of being his authentic self in that way, and then him not really worrying about it, where he
Yeah.
wasn't ashamed of it. People respected that and were drawn to that and drawn to him. And even though we as children, and I teased him about it sometimes, because it kind of created some embarrassment on our end, we we learned to just really just appreciate that, and it was, um, something to respect, actually,
I
because
love it.
yeah, I mean, like, when you're a kid, you might find it a little embarrassing, but as you get older, you
Oh,
start to
absolutely.
you totally see the consistency and the lack of dissonance. You know what I mean? And you're just like, wow, you can appreciate that, how
Hmm.
real your father was in both of those roles.
Oh, absolutely. I remember we used to. My dad would he would make a big deal out of buying these like cheap running shoes, and I'm like, Dad, okay, whatever. These are corny or whatever. He's
Yeah.
like, yo, man, I got these for like $20 or something. And I'm like, so, like, and I'm thinking, you need to buy some expensive shoes.
Yeah.
But now that I'm a father myself, it's like, I understand that. You don't, what do you need with a pair of, $200 shoes? I'm not a sneakerhead anymore, but if they could get me to point A to point B and I get 30, but pay $30 for it, I'd
Mhm.
make a big deal out of it too,
Yeah.
But 20 years ago, probably, or what, 50, I don't know. When you pass 30, you just kind of forget how old you are. So years ago, I was,
Back then.
yeah.
Oh wow.
So yeah, man. So in middle school,
Hmm.
going to high school, was it pretty consistent, um, just routine with you and your family? Your
Yeah.
father's pastoring, you're helping out at the church, getting more involved.
Hmm.
Now, let me ask you this question. Did your dad have like a lot of in-house Bible studies with you?
Meaning with me myself, or just like with parishioners that
No,
get
just
involved
like
in
just
sin?
family Bible study. Just you and your siblings, your mom.
Uh, to be honest, no.
Hmm.
If I were to answer that honestly, I would say no. Um, my mom was probably more the intentional prayer with, bringing the family together in those ways. Um, Even though my father was involved in it and obviously brought into the conversations and into the life of the home God and the scripture and stuff, it was not necessarily a organized time
Hmm.
that he
Okay.
initiated or
Gotcha.
led. But if there were situations where we all jointly prayed, he would be the one that did it.
Hmm.
If that makes
Gotcha.
sense. Like if my mom would say, like, if someone's praying on behalf of the family, it's you, dad, it's you, husband,
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha.
yeah.
Now, your father being a pastor and you growing up,
Hmm.
going through the keys of life and the rhythms of life, becoming a young man, I guess dating, grades, sports, whatever. Did you ever have the notion that your father didn't have time for you and he all his time was at the church, or you didn't feel like that?
Well, actually, that just reminded me. That is another factor why many PKs turn out, or could turn out to not be so great.
Right, right, right.
Or they kind of embody that stereotype because of fatherly absence, because
Hmm.
their father is just spending all their time in the church and with parishioners and less time with family and their children. I
Hmm.
forgot to bring up that particular point. My
Yeah.
father, no, um, he was not like that. He was very involved, very present. So I never felt uninvolved,
Hmm.
or that he did not care. He was very intentional with that. I played soccer. I was really into that. Um, Many times practices were an hour away. Uh,
Mm.
Several
Why
times,
were they an hour away?
because I played pretty high up, for youth soccer, and
Hmm.
it kind of captured like all of Western New York, which is a decently sized geography.
Yeah.
So those practices would be north towns while we lived in the south towns, and it could be an hour away. We would leave at 5 for a 6 o'clock practice that goes till 7:30, and he would drive us back home, get home 8:39, and then he'd go to sleep and then wake up at 4:35 to start the day all over again. Uh, and so absolutely, I always felt loved and, by my father, and felt that he had the time, and he always made the time,
That's
and he
awesome.
always was able to figure it out. Um, that doesn't mean that I wish that my father was more involved with different topics,
Mm.
and more proactive in conversation with certain topics that come along with,
What topics?
being a middle schooler and moving forward. Well, understanding myself as a man, and the changes that I was going through sexually, physically, you know what I mean? All of that,
You
what
know,
was going on, it was.
I th- I
Go
don't
ahead.
know what it is, but I think I could relate to that because I don't think I've had those type of talks with my father either. It's
Yeah,
almost like it's a hands off conversation when it should be a hands on conversation.
exactly.
Um, I don't remember a great extensive talk about sex. Not a. I don't know.
Mm,
Sex. I I had cousins that would talk about it a lot,
mm,
and it was like a peer pressure type of
mm.
thing. I didn't know the value of it. I knew that we weren't supposed to do it, and if you did, gotta be mad at you. That was what I got.
Yeah.
But I don't remember my father bringing me in and saying, "Hey, let's sit down and talk about this. Here, let's we could pull up a Bible too if you want. let's go through this thing because this thing is very important.
Yeah.
I didn't really have that. I remember a talk, but it wasn't like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and same here. And I look back, and it's one of the things that was so powerful with my father in terms of why I he was a lot more flexible and less rigid and less um, forceful, and all of these things. And it allowed me the freedom to grow up and allowed me the freedom to kind of to see the faith in action in my family and it being real, that also allowed me to make it my own and make it real.
Mhm,
It wasn't so trying to shove it down, though it was still to saturate my life and so forth. But the downside was in those type of things, I really wish my father would have had those conversations with me and not left me to figure it out.
mhm. Now,
Um,
did you date a lot? And I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, and not that like I ended up terribly. I just mean I kind of look back and I really wish some things would have been spared,
Gotcha.
or I wish
Gotcha.
I would have been able to um, have a little bit more hands-on guidance through some of the dating relationships,
Hmm.
and so forth. But
Did you get into any serious relationships in high school or middle school?
less middle school, high school. Yeah, I had several girlfriends.
Hmm.
Yeah, and nothing serious came of them, you know, in any way, shape, or form within the relationship. But um, it was confusing. It was hard to figure out what I was supposed to be doing, other than I knew how a man was to treat a woman from
Hmm.
certain kind of benevolent conversations and also the observance of my father. But understanding myself and the urges and the impulses, and you know um, that was an uncomfortable conversation for my father.
So you
And
brought it up with him, and he was like,
you get to,
"Let's not talk about it."
yeah, you could tell he was uncomfortable with it. And some of the times it had to do with, and just being completely transparent, the computer and being a boy,
Mm.
growing up. And it was more, one time I remember getting caught, not in the act, but caught that I did it. And it was more like a really uncomfortable conversation, not just because I was getting in trouble, but it was just like, I'm just going to tell you, don't do it. It was just like, don't do it. And it was very much like, this could really mess with your head growing up and can
Hmm.
really mess with your future marriage, which,
Hmm.
okay, that's
Yeah,
fair,
yeah, 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 yeah.
but it wasn't really an involved depth that I think was needed to walk through that season of my life,
Hmm.
to kind of cope with all of the complexities that I was feeling and experiencing, and
Oh yeah,
and it was more I knew based off of those little conversations how uncomfortable it was, that it wasn't something I would be like go to talk to him about,
oh yeah, yeah.
you know.
I think that's the thing with it's like stand up parents.
Mhm.
It's almost like you look at them like they are perfect. So it's like, could they even relate to my mess? Even growing up, it's like,
Yeah.
do you even understand this? Like,
Mhm.
as a child, you probably think your parents have been straight shooters their entire lives. So,
Yeah.
because that's how, you've raised them. It's like, if your father is a pastor, got married, did things right, and then you get the side of your dad that's just, God all the time, then it's just you don't see how he used to be and
Yeah.
different things. So he's going to tell you the right way, which is fine. But if you don't have that understanding, it's like, I don't think he'll understand me. He doesn't get
Mhm.
it. He's
Mhm.
always like that. Because I can relate to that too.
Yeah.
It's a tough barrier to break down.
Mhm.
um, and I think if it's possible, if it depending on how transparent the father is, it's
Mhm.
like, okay, if your
Yeah.
son's comfortable enough to have these conversations, but I think the dad shouldn't lower himself too much to make it, hey, we're pals and we're buddies, because hey
Yeah.
son, children still need guidance too,
Right.
so you got to gauge it for sure.
It's definitely tough. And I think part of it with my father was uh, he left home. He went to boarding. He might even went to boarding middle school, but he definitely went to boarding high school. And then he went to college, boarding college. And then he went to seminary. And then he took his call to Buffalo. He literally left home when he was like 13 or 14.
Mm.
And he himself went through those stages, majority of those stages, without being present with his father. So
Mm.
he himself didn't have that experience to be able to even know to do that as a father, if that makes sense.
So your father didn't
How I
have a
chalk it up
relationship with
to.
his father? I'm
Oh
sorry.
no, he did. But in terms of like he wasn't at home when he was kind of going through those stages. For it to be so hands-on, or I don't think that his dad and him had that type of relationship in which they talked about those things,
Hmm.
those man things, pertaining to sexuality and those urges and the computer and all of those things. I don't even think there was a computer then.
Yeah, I think they probably just had magazines at that point.
Magazines at that point, right? So,
Uh,
um,
yeah,
but no, they absolutely had a relationship, and
that's
no,
good.
nothing negative. Yeah.
So, being a pastor's kid,
Hmm.
um, you graduate high school, you go to
Hmm.
college, you're still growing, young man.
Hmm.
Uh, when did you want to become a pastor? How did that happen?
Oh, that is a fun question. Uh, as you know, the line of pastors is just simply my dad's a pastor, my brother's a pastor, and I'm a pastor. So both of my dad's sons became pastors in his
Hmm.
likeness. Uh, I can't share my story without sharing my story with my brother, because it's just kind of funny how it paralleled and was different. Because
Sure.
no one expected my brother to be a pastor, uh, nor did he ever express interest in it. He came home like, I think it was his junior or senior year in college, and was just like, dropped the bomb that he was gonna become a pastor, and I was like, oh, okay. No one had thought of it for him. No one had even encouraged it, not in a bad way, but just it just wasn't on the radar. But it was just so resolute when he made the decision, and then he just became a
Mm.
pastor, right? For me, everybody thought I was going to become a pastor.
Oh, okay.
And everybody kind of encouraged it. Everybody kind of brought that up in conversation here and there growing up. And it didn't turn me off, but I absolutely, my path was a little bit more wavy, if you want to put it that
Gotcha.
way. And it was always on the back of my head, obviously, like how could it not be if somebody's always, the community of faith is bringing that up a lot sometimes. But I was on route to, I went to college playing Division I soccer, already playing semi-professional soccer at that point. I thought that was where I was heading
Hmm.
in the immediate future, more immediate future, to pursue that. Like that was the avenue God was opening up for my life, with that passion and that gift that He gave me. And I loved history, so
Hmm.
I attended Binghamton University on scholarship to play soccer and major in history. Um, and again, I had a religious studies, and I was like, well, I'll still dabble in that, and I'll just keep that. I'll keep that on hold, and possibly something to explore. So it was just kind of put off. There were a lot of other besides soccer. I was considering military. There was just a lot of different passions that I could see myself walking toward and down. But it was actually my kind of Kairos moment. My sorry, my um, pinnacle moment was my freshman year in college.
Mm-hmm.
Within my first semester, I hurt my back severely,
Mm-hmm.
um, to the point where I was bedridden. I could not get out of bed some days. Uh, I uh, was not really sure if I was ever going to be able to play soccer again.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot more complex than that, but to keep it simple, that was kind of the predicament I was in based off of my back injury. And obviously, if that was the direction I had kind of set up thinking that's where God was leading me, it was like, boom, probably not, maybe not. Even it
Right.
took a while for me to get back. I was able to play again by my junior year, not at the same college I transferred. But I was like, I'm not going to be able to. It's going to be almost too difficult for me to get back into Division One with this
Mhm.
injury. So that's
Right.
one of the reasons why I transferred. So this is a lot more convoluted. But so that was one aspect to it, was that being brought to my knees, brought to my bed, being bedridden, um, that kind of direction being robbed, from me,
Right.
so to speak. But also, I was the only Christian on my team, and I was the only Christian in my dorm, as far as I know, but definitely the only Christian in my suite. So the way
Mm.
it was worked is I had five other roommates, because it was like three dorms in a suite. That was kind of its own existence, and that was a very both rewarding experience, but also very damaging, um, in
How
the
so?
sense, well, self-imposed damaging, because I went through a lot of despair that
Mm.
in that experience with my back injury, that
Right.
my resolution of being a uh, my faith dwindled, at different points, and um, I kind of fell into some of the traps and fell into partying, trying to cope with my hurt and my despair that I was experiencing. So I started kind of embracing some of their lifestyle.
How
It
was your
became
was your father around for that part? Did you keep in contact with him for that? How vocal
um
was he?
I think I kept certain aspects of that hidden.
Mhm.
Um though I made it real, the struggle that I was going through spiritually. If that makes sense. I kind of kept some of the the behavior, uh I wasn't like off the walls, but it was not anything I'm
Yeah.
proud of. And uh
Now, quick question:
yeah.
why do you think you couldn't tell your father?
uh I think it was that natural fear of your father. Not, I don't, I look, I think about that and I'm like, no, I wasn't afraid. He was a very gracious man, but I don't think I was afraid of what he would think of me. I was
Mm.
afraid of the disappointment, you know,
Yeah.
I was afraid of that. I was concerned of that he, just the look in his eyes, or the tone of his voice if he shared that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and it was one of those things. So in my experience, that I had a complete turnaround. I hit rock bottom, both physically and then also spiritually, in that time, and I was just so ashamed of my mistakes, that I contemplated hurting myself.
Mm.
You know and um God really placed certain people in my life. My brother, who, had conversations with me on the phone. He, all of a sudden, I literally mean this. Somehow, a Christian student organization found me. Like, just our paths crossed, a Korean Christian fellowship, and they welcomed me in. Like, just welcomed me in, and really loved me during that time. And even would bring me food when I couldn't get out of bed. It was just really, really
Yeah.
profound, divine moments that God was kind of, stacking on top of each other. And then there was a local family, again, a local Lutheran family that somehow learned of me. I still don't know how. It sounds creepy, but they somehow learned of me, and they somehow got a hold of me,
Mm-hmm.
and they started picking me up for church every Sunday.
Oh, sweet.
And it was really, all of those kind of different pieces were so moving. And then my experience being the only Christian in the dorm, and then having those relationships with them, and those conversations with my dorm mates, both pre me screwing up and then post me screwing up,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
all of that convinced me that God was actually leading me to be a pastor.
Mm.
Um,
Okay,
you
gotcha.
know all of those interactions, all of those experiences, all of the heart that God was forming in me, through them, where the Holy Spirit was tugging, saying, hey, you know um, this is where I'm leading you to, Jonah. And
Gotcha.
it's not like I just woke up and was like, boom, I'm gonna be
Gotcha.
a pastor. I had to go through the fire.
So
And
yeah, go ahead.
no, I was saying, so
Um,
that was a long-winded.
oh, no, it's all good. So with that being said, you went through this season of just excuse me, of despair,
Hmm.
and your father knew about some elements of it. And what were some of his words to encourage you that if you can remember them?
Oh man, trying to remember. My dad was absolutely encouraging, and then he learned a lot more post, after some of the healing. And he was very accepting and loving. He never, amidst it. In terms of that, during those times,
Mm-hmm.
I think my dad called me, every other day. And if I don't remember all the conversations, to be honest, and I don't remember most of it. I remember some of the big conversations with my brother, but I remember the actions of him calling, pretty regularly, and always picking up the phone when I called.
Mm, that's powerful.
I don't remember all the content, but I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Gotcha.
and yeah, and I think that itself is encouraging.
Yeah, it is.
You know,
Cause he's there.
yeah.
I there's something about just a father,
Hmm.
just being there for you when you need him to.
Hmm.
And I see, yeah, I mean, you have small children, but when they cry or something goes wrong, they run to you.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
it's almost like, help me, and then you pick them up, and then all is well. You don't really do anything, but it's enough for them. And I think that's awesome,
Yeah.
for that. Were you going to say something or?
Well, I was gonna say, again, it's like one of those powerful things where, I was saying how when I close my eyes and I think of the church that I grew up in, I can remember the details, the look. I remember not necessarily what was said. I remember conversations and where I was on campus. And
Oh yeah.
I remember the times where I would be on one of the paths to get from, in my crippled way, from
Hmm.
class to, back to my dorm, looking and seeing my dad calling on my old Samsung flip phone,
Hmm.
and picking it up. And, I just remember those kind of images, and
Yeah.
those being some highlights, and uplifting times.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's awesome. And just to skip ahead a little bit,
Hmm.
graduate college.
Hmm.
Somewhere along the line, you meet Crystalline,
Okay. Yep.
and you guys get married.
Hmm.
Now, how, did you? How did your father react to that news, or did you bring her home, and say, "Hey, Dad, I think this might be it. What do you think?" What were some of his words then? If you,
It was more like, it's about time. Um, No, because out of my siblings, I by no means got married late by any standard globally.
Mhm.
I mean, it depends on the culture, but in my Buffalo culture and then also my family, I got married later. My sister and
Mhm.
brother were like 21.
Oh, I
You know,
gotcha.
and I was 20. Oh my goodness, I don't even remember, 27.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
uh, so they were just rooting for me to find the right girl
Right, right.
and to be able to actually come home and say or call home and say this is the one, right? This is
Mhm.
who I'm going to marry. And so they were just elated that I
That's
finally,
awesome.
you know, um because at this point I had moved out to LA,
Mhm.
um single, and was in my what's called a vicarage, which is essentially student pastor internship stuff. While I'm
Mhm.
doing the studies, I'm student pastoring actively. And it's hard in that state to find someone, but
Mhm.
then becoming a pastor, it's hard. It worked out for my father, right? But it's hard, right? You're a public pastor figure. It's kind of hard to find somebody who is going to be willing to marry that, or where would you find somebody if you're not going to be looking within your own church,
Right.
type of thing. So it was what we were wondering if it was going to happen or not.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and it just kind of was just like about time, really elated,
Mhm.
really, really supportive. And yeah, and they were very gracious with the fact that my relationship with Crystalline was not between her and I, but we were at a distance. They didn't meet her or get to know her at the same pace or level that they did with my sister-in-law or my brother-in-law,
Mhm.
because they were so young. They were kind of like involved in the family a lot.
Right, right, right.
You know, I was already distant, able to go home maybe once a year.
Mhm.
All of our relationship was all apart from them.
Yeah.
You know, so been very really welcoming, which is so meaningful.
Awesome.
Um, I didn't expect anything different, but my dad treated her like she was family.
That's awesome.
First time meeting her, you know.
Yeah. It sounds like your father was just a really, stand-up guy. He was there for you. He made time. He's a
Yeah,
pastor, preacher. And it sounds like he really lived out what he preached. I mean, to
yeah,
the best of his ability. It doesn't seem like he was in it for the money or, you know,
no,
whatever reason people get into that. Um, that's not really beneficial to others, but it seems like he was doing it because he really had a conviction and love
hmm,
for God and people.
yeah,
That's really remarkable. It's a refreshing to hear stories like this.
yeah. My dad
Um,
was he was a true shepherd. He is a true shepherd, both in the profession, but also with us as children, you know.
awesome,
Yeah,
awesome.
and to share, with my
Mhm.
regarding my father and me becoming a pastor, my dad, somebody was like, "Did he really encourage that?" Like, did like the fact that my brother and I both turned out that way? It sounds, it kind of comes off like, it was in the family. Keep it in the family. And we're like, actually, no. Again, my dad
Mhm.
had that like flexible like aura, gave us the space, you know, to
Mhm.
discover. And if anything, he did the opposite. He was real about it.
Mm.
Not only because we saw a lot, like there were boundaries, but we did, we saw the challenges of being a pastor, being pastors' children. But he was real with it. He's like, hey, if you're looking for an easy job, I remember these conversations. He's like, if you're looking for an easy job with good pay and all this stuff, this isn't it. Like he's like, this is not what it's for.
Right.
And it's hard work. Uh,
Mhm.
and he was a pastor at the same church for 39 years.
Now, is your father still alive?
He is, yeah.
Okay, that's
He
awesome.
retired. Yeah, he retired. Um, I can't remember how many years back. 2015.
Gotcha.
After
Gotcha.
39 years, he baptized, confirmed, married, and buried people.
Man,
Like lifespans of people. Sadly, just how
wow.
long he was there. Yeah.
Wow, that is a very long time. Very long time. Well, just winding down, Bart, I want to ask you, what is one thing that you want to share with our listeners of what you've learned from your father?
Hmm. I think our just reiterating what I shared, and this is the thing that's really on my heart as a father, especially with little girls, and with girls is um, a father's presence is absolutely crucial and critical and meaningful to um, a child that may not show up until that child's older.
Mm,
And you might not get the gratitude or the until later.
mhm,
um, that my dad did everything to be creative, to be present. And yes, he might have had a job that allowed him to have that creative time to kind of move
mhm,
things around. Um, but he did it, and I don't think that should take away from how much he had to think about and work to situate his day to be that type of dad, um,
mhm.
that I have always remembered and will and pray I could live up to as a father. Like I sometimes I'm like I don't I sleep past a certain time and I'm like, oh, my dad. I'm like, he never did this.
I know. Where did I get this behavior from?
I was like, I'm like, he never did. He never slept longer than he was supposed to.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes our culture, you know, which I'm sure you completely are in line with, devalues the role of a father. But I think also it's because you don't see the same neediness of a child toward the father as you do toward the mom in those early years.
In the early years, yeah.
Yeah, but the impact and longevity is so essential, um, that I
Yeah.
think the fathers really need to sacrifice what they want out of the moment.
Hmm.
That appreciation, that sense that they're doing something to know that they're building a foundation,
Right.
um, that will bear fruit in due season.
Yeah.
You know,
It's a greater picture
yeah,
uh type of endeavor. It's
yeah,
really, really a bigger picture endeavor.
yeah,
And it takes time. Like you said longevity is a really good word.
yeah,
It it's not a quick microwave deal. It's not.
yeah.
It's really laying brick for a long time. But
Yeah,
it does pay off.
absolutely. And my dad never complained about his service to us as children, um, and the amount of effort he put in. I sometimes like, how did he have the energy like to do that and then drive us an hour to soccer? And like, I look back, I'm like, how did you have this energy? And never complained about it. And like I said, he really showed the character of a father being a servant. And I think even if like sometimes, uh even if a father's present, there's like this machoism, uh aura of like, this is what a father man is as a present
Right.
father, active father. And I think my dad just showed that, yeah, first and foremost to me, like, I'm a servant, and that's the character I want to show you.
Mhm.
And I think that was really, really, really meaningful to me.
Well, Bart, I want to thank you for coming on the show. It's really refreshing hearing the stories about you and your father, and it seems like a really good model of something, especially walking in the I guess the ministry of being a pastor.
Hmm.
Um, it's really remarkable how he really laid it all down for you guys, and I'm sure you still call him to this day and just pick his brain about certain things.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely. Especially as
dude,
a
that's
pastor.
awesome. Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, man, I thanks again for coming on the show. It was really cool having you, and it was a blessing to have Crystalline as well. And is there anything you want to say to close us out? Any last minute tips you want to leave the viewers with, or
No,
if you
just
want to plug your church or something? Anyone in the LA area? I don't know.
I don't need to do that. I get the privilege of being a college pastor, and that's a huge time. And that's one of the reasons why I love being and have it on my heart to be a college pastor is that experience that I shared with you. Uh,
Yeah.
and I kind of get to be like I see myself uh, with many of the students that I work with as a partner to their fathers, whether their
Hmm.
fathers were present or not.
All
uh,
right. Right. Right.
in impacting the lives of those kids, and um, and walking alongside of them. So that's one of the big reasons why I'm a college pastor was that experience and um, showing that manhood, what it means to be a man in Christ, uh,
Hmm.
toward other men and toward women, what it's the guys are meant to, how they're supposed to be a man toward women and so forth. But mainly, I want to thank you for inviting both Crystal and me to be a part of this. I think this is really great. I think
Hmm.
it's so needed.
Hmm.
So keep it up. This is awesome.
Hmm.
And praying for you and all the listeners that are
Hmm.
hearing this, whatever your walks of life is or are. Um, take fatherhood seriously
Yeah.
um, and listen to all the stories and experiences of children.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah,
thanks again, man,
no
and
problem.
thank you for that. The prayer, and praise God for what He's doing.
Yeah.
Everyone, have a wonderful, blessed